As you know, I'm Leandro. I am the coordinator of the On Think Tank School. I will briefly introduce this webinar and our trainer today. I'm very happy that most of you could join the webinar. This is a good number, so hopefully we will jump into an interesting conversation led by Jeff. So let me tell you a little bit about the methodology. Many of you have already participated in other courses of the school, so you are already aware, but for the new ones, let me tell you some things. The first thing is that try to keep your mics off. Otherwise, I will be putting them off so it doesn't interfere with Jeff's presentation. In terms of your interventions, you will have the chance to use the chat whenever you want to post your questions, concerns, ideas, share an experience, etc. And Jeff will pick it up timely. And you have also the opportunity to unmute your mics and jump in with your thoughts and ideas. So 2 channels, unmute your mic and share your comment, or use the chat. Both of them are correct. In case we are delaying a lot Jeff's presentation, he will let you know. So please participate as much as you want. That's the idea and the spirit of the webinar. So the webinar will last between 75 and 90 minutes. And as you know, it's being recorded. So we will share both the presentation and the record afterwards. So some words about Jeff. He's a digital communication strategist and data visualization specialist, currently based in London. He helps develop and implement strategic policy influence approaches and capacities for different organizations. And his core communication skills lies in the digital space and in synthesizing complex information into targeted briefings. So he will be sharing his experience today. He has also worked for organizations such as Nothing Trust, Institute for Development Studies, and ODI in London. And besides being the trainer of this short course, Jeff also leads the On Think Tank's data visualization competition. So Jeff, now is your turn. Thank you very much, everyone, and hope you will enjoy the next 90 minutes.
Well, welcome everybody. 90 minutes is a bit ambitious, but actually I will do my very best. My goal was to make this a 60-minute workshop, but Leandro has seen the slides and has already said, "Well, that's too many." So we'll see what I can do. The honest answer is that I've been working with data visualization for so long that I can speak on it for 10 minutes, or I can speak on it for 10 days. So hopefully we'll find a good compromise somewhere in the middle in here. For now, I'm going to have my video on so you can see me in the background. If you see me looking to the side, it's because I have the chat box on a different screen. So in order to be able to actually see if you're messaging things, I have to be looking that direction. So apologies, it doesn't mean I'm not paying attention. It just means I'm trying to actually see what else is going on. As a reminder, I do want to make this as interactive as possible, but if you are not talking, if you're not ready to jump in with a question, please remember to keep your microphone muted. But there are several places in here where you'll notice that I'll be asking for people to jump in. But otherwise, please do unmute yourself and ask a question as we're going along. With any luck with the headphones, I should be able to hear you just fine. So let's get stuck in. The course today has two main parts, and these will be complemented later with next week a different focus, and the following week and kind of a more practical focus on working specifically with some data visualizations tools, namely Excel and Tableau. But for now, this first session is about having a kind of almost theoretical or general idea, an introduction to the concept of data visualization, and also what goes into making an effective data visualization. And at the very end, just for those of you who are participating in the course, we will have a quick look at what the assignment is ultimately over the duration of the course here this June. So let's get stuck in and go straight into an introduction to data visualization. In this section, we'll talk a little bit about a few key terms and definitions, and we'll look a little bit at the current context of why I think this is so important and so timely. And then we will take an overview of the different types of data visualization. It's great that some of you are already participating in the forum. I encourage you to take a look and see what's there if you haven't already. But we've had one question already of, is an infographic a type of data visualization? Well, we're going to get to that in just a few minutes. So key terms and definitions. A data visualization, effectively, is a way of visually conveying information. A lot of the time it's quantitative in nature, but not all of the time. And we'll see a few examples of both qualitative and quantitative visualizations throughout this course. But the idea is that it's in an accurate and compelling format, something that engages the viewer straight away. One of the most important things that data visualizations can do is that they can make relationships between various data points just more apparent. And they do this by clustering information points together, by color coding things, by putting items in the same scale. That's an incredibly important one. And they can be static, motion, or interactive, and we'll talk about the different types of visualizations here in a second. But I did want to clarify one thing, which is today, are we talking about data visualization or information visualization? And to hit this point home, I assume that you all know exactly what that says, yes? Anybody? No, oh, that's a no from Caitlin. Uh-oh. What do you mean you can't read that? Maybe you know what it is, but somebody said exactly, it is binary code, but maybe you still can't translate that into something that is a bit legible. Of course, then fine. Then maybe if I tell you that actually what that means is that, then you definitely know what it is now, right? I'm not too sure what the two backward slashes mean, but it's still not yet. Okay. Well, that's actually ASCII code, which represents different characters, which, of course, if I tell you this, you know what that means, yes? I hope that at this point you actually know what hello is. Excellent. And that is kind of the difference between data and information. Data is the raw material. The French word for data actually gives us a clue as to the Latin root for it, les données, that which is given. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can automatically process or interpret that data. So what our objective is today, or as we're learning about these, is not actually to create data visualizations, but to think a little bit more about how do we actually convey information? How do we make sure that people understand what we're trying to say? And one note that I will kind of say about that is I came across this quote in the Harvard Business Review a few weeks back, and I thought this is actually really good because it really highlights that the fact that the term data visualization, or even if we want to go on as far as information visualization, is really a terrible term. It basically focuses a lot on the process or the procedure, and it's like calling Moby Dick a word sequentialization or Starry Night by Van Gogh pigment distribution, which, you know, I suppose they technically are, but I think that that leaves to one side the skill, the art, and whatnot that goes into making an effective visualization. It's not all just a process, although the process is important. All right, so that's what an information visualization is. But why is it so important? Why are you actually here at this course? And I suppose that is a good question. Why are you interested in joining this course on data visualization? And why do you think your organization should enhance its use of data visualizations? Feel free to unmute a microphone or to maybe type an answer to either of those questions as you see fit. Let's see if anybody's brave enough to unmute the microphone.
Maybe I could.
Please do, Renata.
Hello. So we have quite a few people here at the computer, but until it's quiet, I'd like to share. In my organization, we work mostly with qualitative information. And we write all these long reports to present our policy research, which is very interesting to us. But I'd like to make sure that it's just as interesting to our audience. And I think we need to move a little bit from only text to text and visual material. That's why I'm here.
Excellent. So it's about moving beyond just text, making sure it's relevant for your audiences, and recognizing that probably that the way people are consuming information is changing a little bit. Absolutely. Would anybody else like to jump in? I see Alex has written that to me it's a way of communicating more effectively, and also a great way of sharing something that you know in a way others can enjoy or understand. Absolutely, a data visualization should really inspire and capture people's imagination, and I think that's a really important part of this. I think as we get into some of the practicalities of making a data visualization, it becomes, yeah, do this, paint by the numbers, do that, but actually it's about working to inspire people and really capture people's imagination. And we have Renata again saying sometimes just reading a number is a little boring, but reading numbers in a different way is more interesting. And for Nelson, it appears to be about making things more understandable. And I think that goes to the heart of what I was saying. Sometimes in what a data visualization does so well is it can put a particular number or concept or idea in a particular context. And that can really help make sure that it is accessible to more people. And Peter says it may also be one of the ways of data analysis, which is absolutely correct, and we will come on to. And now we've got comments coming in thick and fast, so I can't actually follow them. So reports, Jennifer says that reports are a way we communicate, but not necessarily how people consume information. Visualizations convey a huge amount of info in a short amount of time. That's what I like to see. And Caitlin is taking it back to policymakers and kind of this idea of evidence-informed decision-making or evidence data-based decision-making, and saying in order to do that, we need to understand and analyze data. So there are a lot of reasons in the quote-unquote room for why people are interested in data visualization. So that's really great. I'm going to kind of carry on with some of the reasons why I think this is an important area at the moment. And I think you'll see that it reflects a lot of what you've just been saying there. So I suppose to start with, I'm not going to go into huge detail about all of these, but I think that one of the reasons they've become so powerful is that we are living in a time where we have access to new and different kinds of data. A lot of time that's referred to as big data, although that's not the only way that it's working. we have a lot of new technology that's become accessible to us to be able to understand and interpret that. And then a lot of what we were just talking about there was that there are some changes in the way we access information. And I wanted to focus a little bit on that one for the time being. One of the things that we know very clearly is that global internet usage around the world is up, and it continues to increase at a relatively rapid pace. Something like 3/4 of North America has internet access, while sub-Saharan Africa is maybe about 1/4. It's still increasing rapidly. And one of the ways that we know that it's increasing rapidly is if we take a look at how many mobile phone subscriptions there are per 100 people. In most of the world, there are actually more mobile phone subscriptions than there are people, which means that actually that changes a lot the way that we're accessing the information. What does that imply in terms of the technological shift? What does that imply in terms of how we access information? Well, there's a lot of blurring of the digital and analog, and so you see think tanks in particular working to create more interactive publications or digital long form, for example. We have people who have shorter attention spans who are dual screening, so maybe they're looking at their computer and they're on their mobile phone at the same time and the TV is on in the background. We have a lot more of an expectation for interactivity. I don't know how many of you have younger children, but maybe you've seen somebody that is used to working with an iPad go up to a window and try and zoom in on a cloud, you know. Doesn't quite work that way in the real world, but it's again that blurring in the digital and the analog. And there are more and more expectations of immediacy. And one of the things that if you create some of these visualizations, they can be updated live. So that, I think, gets to the nub of what you were saying in terms of we write reports, but are people reading reports? This study from 2014, I think, is a good one that you've probably seen before, which suggested that about 1/3 of World Bank PDFs had never been downloaded. 1/3? It's quite a lot. Apparently, of the 2/3 that had, I think it was something like half of them had only been downloaded once, and I assume that that's the author checking to make sure that it's there. So we have a problem, we have a disconnect, and visualizations are an opportunity to bridge that sort of thing and display information in a different way that perhaps fits more with the way people are consuming information. I mentioned before that there are lots of new technologies for production. The last time that we ran this course, we went over a lot of different technologies very, very briefly. And the feedback was that actually that was a lot of information to take in. So what we're going to do in the way that we're approaching this series is to focus on 2 specific technologies and do them in a little bit more detail over the next couple of weeks. So like I said, mainly Excel or Google Sheets and Tableau is what we're going to be focusing on. But if you're interested, the On Think Tank's data visualization competition has a number of different resources that you can look at and see what sort of technologies are there that might help you be able to create some of these after we've kind of wet your whistle here during the next couple of webinars. So that's the context. We've done definition, we've done context. The last thing that we maybe want to cover off in terms of an introductory sense is thinking a little bit more through the types of different information visualizations that exist. And I guess in the grand scheme of things, there are 2 ways that I've seen this outlined. And one is kind of taking a look at what are the different types of visualization, thinking about the different functions that they may have. So this was from that same Harvard Business Review article. I do recommend checking it out. I'm sure if you Google Berionotto 2016 Harvard Business Review data visualizations, he will pop up, but I will also put it in the forum. He basically says that visualizations can have one of 4 different functions depending on whether or not they are at the top here declarative, i.e. they're trying to tell a very specific story, or some of you were mentioning that one of the great things about data visualizations is that they allow you to explore lots of different things or discover things, let the user find their own story, and that could be part of the data analysis function that someone was talking about as well earlier, not just the communication function. And these tend to be ones that have perhaps more on the qualitative side of things. Some are more conceptual, whereas some are more specifically, he calls them data-driven, let's call them quantitative. And so that means that there are 4 different types. There's the idea illustration, idea generation, visual discovery, and then your everyday data viz. A lot of what we're going to be talking about in the webinar next week is in the everyday data viz side of things. What we'll be talking about in the following one is the visual discovery. But let me show you some examples of each of these different types of visualization. In terms of idea illustration, we have this one from the Alliance for Useful Evidence, which you can see doesn't have any specific numbers, but it's tried to cluster things by, for example, the big red, I don't even know what to call that, blob, I guess, is basically government-related bodies. You have the yellow-related blob, all basically evidence producers, like your universities or independent organizations. And then you have kind of some intermediaries in the orange block, as well as you have coding by the different icons, whether they're knowledge producers, consumers, or intermediaries, and you see that they all kind of function at different levels. So this doesn't technically have any specific data associated with it, but it's conveying an overall concept. It's trying to illustrate what the ecosystem for social policy is in the UK. So that's an example of idea illustration. In terms of idea generation, this is where data visualization can serve, in particular, as part of a data analysis or a research process. And I really like this example, which is from Flowing Data. And what this person has done, it's a great blog, by the way. I also recommend checking out their blog. They basically show their experiments as they go along. But what this person has done is they've said, okay, life expectancy at birth, they have rates for that for all the different UN countries, and they have it over time from 2000 to 2015. And if I'm not mistaken, they have it divided as well by male and female life expectancy rates. So we've got one data set, but that doesn't mean that there's only one way of visualizing that information. So here there's just a general line. I don't know that it tells us very much, except to say there seems to be a cluster at the top that are doing pretty well, and then also that maybe generally there's an overall trend of an upward movement, or we might take a look at this one and say, what's going on here? What country is that? But maybe it's not the most effective, so why don't we try something else? This is what is known as a trellis plot, where it looks at each of the different countries, and you can kind of see, oh, it's Libya that's having a bit of a wobble, for example. Or we can take a look at it in terms of just ranked from highest to lowest. This one, I don't know how clear that comes across on the screen, but it's actually an animated GIF, I would imagine, of how the life expectancy is changing over time. This one shows the difference over time. You know, this is showing then the gap between male and female. What's really great about this is that each of these different charts tells a different story. And that's not to say that one particular visualization is correct or one particular visualization isn't correct. One of the things that we'll talk about is that it depends hugely on your objective and on your audience and what sort of a story you're trying to tell. But I love that I'm maybe getting through nearly all 25 ways of visualizing this information. But I highly recommend that you explore that in further detail anyway. And that's just to show that, like I said, there's no one way of doing it, and visualizations can help you come up with ideas, help you potentially find the story. One that we call visual discovery. So this is something where you tend to have a little bit more data, but you kind of want to let the user explore things rather than necessarily telling a specific story. This is an example that we have from the Czech Republic that I really like. It's called Mapping Czech Crime. And what you can see straight away in this sort of an exercise is that there's different layers of information. So there's a lot of information there, but actually looking at the map, you can start engaging with it and you can start saying, okay, that's Prague, that capital, what's there? Once you click on it, more information comes up in terms of what has been cleared, what's not been cleared, what types of crime, that's physical assaults or robberies or wherever. So one of the things, again, about data visualizations is that they can help the user discover their own story. They can say, I'm really curious about Prague, or I'm really curious about this rural area of, no, I'm not going to be able to pronounce that. Any guesses? I don't know. But they can kind of find their own story, and there's different layers of information. So they're not telling the story all at once, they're having the layers and they're thinking of the different audiences. So that's data visualization as visual discovery. And then, of course, there's just everyday data visualization. So this is an example of one that I've worked with at the Nuffield Trust, where this just shows the number of doctors or practicing physicians per capita. And compared to our neighbors, it becomes relatively apparent relatively quickly that indeed the UK is under-doctored. And like I said, a lot of what we'll be doing in the next days or the next weeks are focusing on this, really perfecting this everyday data visualization. So that's one way of looking at it. We can take a look at it by the function that it potentially has, or you can also take a look at it as data visualization by the form that they ultimately take. So the way that I like to look at that is in terms of static data visualizations versus motion versus interactive. And kind of the dividing line between the static and the motion and the interactive is that the static and the motion ones are more about telling a clear story. They're more declarative, sorry, I don't know how we want to pronounce that, whereas the interactive ones are about allowing that exploration. And there's lots of different ways of having the formats that these might take. In terms of a static one, it might be charts for traditional publications. A lot of times think tanks use these sorts of charts in social media to help share ideas that are maybe in their fuller report, or they put them together in a series and make an infographic or a presentation for different researchers to use. Motion ones are really good and for online presentations or social media in particular, because they start telling a story in an engaging way. And interactive ones can be really good dashboards for real-time monitoring of something. I think we're about to have an election in the UK. I'm sure we'll see a few of those interactive visualizations as a real-time monitoring dashboards, basically, as we hear the results come in. They can be great standalone summaries of research, and they can really contribute to maybe online versions of different research reports. So just to give an example, although this is about to move, this is technically a static visualization. I think somebody in the forum earlier today suggested that they really like Jumpstart Georgia for the visuals that they do. This happens to be one from them, from Georgia, called Don't Limit Her Possibilities. And what I really like is it combines, it's basically what we would call an infographic, and it combines icons, photos, charts, and really in a way that is able to tell, I know that went probably too fast for you, but it's able to tell a story of the difference between boys and girls and their attainment in technical science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields. Sorry, I just need a little bit of a drink there. So that's a static one. This one is a good example of a motion visualization, where what we see is that the visualization tries to tell a story. So let me press play and hope that this works and that you can hear it.
The increase in these emissions is the main driver of global warming. Here are the top 20 emitters in the 1860s. The United Kingdom, cradle of the Industrial Revolution, has the highest emissions. By the turn of the 20th century, the United States emerges as the world's largest emitter, but European countries, those in blue, still dominate the picture. By the mid-20th century, the picture is more global. Emerging economies in Asia are rising and Europe declining. This trend continues until the end of the century. Global emissions continue their exponential growth. By 2005, China overtakes the US for the greatest total annual emissions. Sorting the countries by continent reveals Asia's growing contribution. But annual emissions by country are only part of the picture.
I'm not going to have us watch the whole thing, but perhaps we can share it with Donald Trump. But it gives you a good idea of telling a story and kind of in quite a quick and succinct way. In terms of interactive visualizations, that allows for users to engage with and actually potentially manipulate the data. Sometimes they're scenario-based, sometimes they aren't. This is an example where when you're hovering over particular lines, it highlights what state they're in terms of the different obesity levels, basically. Or you can zoom in on Colorado, or you can see, or whatever state you want to. I chose Colorado because it's one of those outliers there. You can see it's one of the least overweight and obese states, but you can actually then go through and change the years and things as well. So you can start looking at how the obesity levels have changed in the US over time, going all the way back to 1990, and you can see it's quite a big difference. So those are kind of the different types of visualizations in terms of the different forms or formats that they can take. Based on all of that, I just thought it would maybe be a good time to pause for a second and see if people have any questions, either written or if people feel like unmuting themselves. Okay, then I'm going to carry along for the time being, but do feel free to interject. And indeed, I think the next thing that I have is a set of questions for you to come in on again. So the second part of this webinar is really around how do we make effective data visualizations. And we'll talk a little bit about the user's experience of data visualization, what makes a good data viz, and telling stories with data. If we have time, we'll even get on to 7 deadly sins. Ooh. But let's start first of all with how users experience data visualization. Effectively, what we have, and maybe some of you saw the advertising for this course, is that the visual nerves, the optic nerves, are sending what we now know is about 20 megabits a second of information back to the brain. That's a heck of a lot. And indeed, it's a lot more than you can convey in words spoken or even on a piece of paper at any one time. So the idea of a data visualization is to really take advantage of that bandwidth, of that information flow into the brain. And there is a big difference in a data visualization. It was kind of what we were getting into, the difference between data and information. But the idea is that we want this to be processed by the subconscious, basically. And that's the difference between system 1 thinking and system 2 thinking. So in blue, we have a smiley face. We know straight away in our subconscious, that means happy person. System 2 thinking, 17 times 24, I'm sure we all know is, carry the 3, it's 408, which based on the information that's provided, we can deduce or we can figure out, and those of us who are good at the mental maths can absolutely take advantage of, but it requires that processing. That is the conscious brain at work rather than taking advantage of the subconscious. Now, there are a load of design principles that we can take advantage of to really get to the subconscious. And they're known as the Gestalt Gestalt School of Design, which I'm not actually going to do an overview of today, but I highly recommend Googling for extra activity, Gestalt Design Principles. And basically what they result in when it comes to data visualization in particular is a sort of scale of, on the left-hand side of the screen, things that are able to be perceived in a really accurate way and in a quick way in using the subconscious brain, through to things on the right-hand side that take a lot more processing and are maybe not quite as easy to take advantage or understand or compute straight away. One of the problems with things like area, for example, especially of circles, is that I'm sure you all remember that the area of a circle is pi r squared, right? So there's that square and there's pi, and it becomes a little bit confusing and makes it a little bit less accurate. So one of the things, and why something like the trellis plot work that I showed you an example of earlier, is because they are single things on a common aligned scale. Things like length, we are very good at perceiving as human beings. Angles, we start to get less so, and that's why there's maybe not as much of a popularity of things like pie charts these days. Slope can be useful, but we're not going to be able to tell you that that's exactly a decrease of a certain amount based just on the slope. It gives us an impression, but it doesn't necessarily convey a really accurate figure. So that's just something to keep in mind. As a general rule, maybe it seems a bit boring, but we want to kind of err on the side of being on this side of the spectrum if our point is about being really accurate. If our point is about giving an impression of something, we'll end up on that side of the scale. One of the other things that is really important is thinking about the meaning of things. I was doing a project, for example, in Afghanistan, where we were doing a community-based scorecard of different of the health system there, basically. And at the end of the day, we were presenting that to policymakers using a traffic light system, the red, yellow, and green traffic lights. However, we did the same sort of exercise in a rural community in Zambia, and the traffic light didn't quite make sense to them. So instead, we started using smiley faces or unhappy faces. So I think it's really important as you start designing or thinking through the design of your data visualizations that you're also keeping in mind who is your audience, what are they going to appreciate or understand, and what's going to resonate with them. So that's some of what makes a good data visualization. But in your experience, what are the key characteristics of a good data visualization? Do you see any of those as more important or less important? So feel free to be typing, or if anybody wants to unmute their microphone and join us that way, you are very welcome to. What are key characteristics of a good data visualization that you are aware of? Jargon-free, says Jennifer. Easy to understand very quickly, little room for misinterpretation. I think that's a really important point, absolutely. Not having too much text or too many colors. All I have is that that's L. I apologize, I don't know who said that. Why do you say not having too much text or too many colors? I'd be curious. Nelson says accuracy. Glenn says it needs to be engaging. Color plus form plus quick plus coherent plus movement. That's a lot of things, Alex. That's a lot to get right all in one, but that is indeed part of the challenge of creating an effective data visualization. Clear message and purpose. Jennifer, I would say that's particularly true for data visualizations that are declarative in nature, that are really trying to tell that particular story. And we have a response on the too many colors. We want to make sure that it's easy to distinguish between the different colors. I'm LT. What's that? Yeah, oh, LT, okay, got it. Right, anyway, are there any that we see as most important on all of that really good list of things? given in mind we need to get Alex's list narrowed down a little bit? Caitlin says mine, of course, and I don't remember exactly what you said. But there we are. Let's see, I'm slowly scrolling up. Hopefully Caitlin will be easy to understand very quickly. Little room for misinterpretation, Caitlin says. Okay, sure, absolutely, very important. I think that, you know, as we're going through this, I've said it before and I'll continue to say it, keeping your audience in mind, keeping your objective in mind are absolutely critical, because data visualization, like we heard before, is a process. The idea is, what is the result that we're going for? But David McCandless, who you might know, who you might be aware of, who runs Information is Beautiful, also has, that's a blog and a book, and he now has a book called Information is Beautiful, Knowledge is Beautiful. It's great and definitely worth checking out. He says that a good visualization always comprises of 4 different elements. It must be interesting, it must serve a specific function, it must pay attention to form, and it must have integrity. What does that mean exactly? In terms of function, we're going to be getting on to a lot of this next week, actually. It's about fulfilling a particular purpose. For example, the data visualization on the left says sales per product. It's not telling a story, where, okay, maybe it's a bit colloquial with that title saying smartphones still kicking sales, but at least the visualization becomes very clear that you're trying to highlight smartphones. You've grouped the other material and you've really made it tell a clear story very simply. And that's the objective of it, so that works really well. So making sure that it serves the function that it's supposed to do is critical. Keeping in mind certain aspects of form. So this is what people were talking about in terms of using too many colors and things like that. This is something that we are going to discuss in much greater detail next week specifically. But this is also a very good reference point if you're looking for kind of a good do's and don'ts of data visualization. I do recommend taking a look at the Wall Street Journal guide to information graphics. But we have to pay attention a lot to design. Integrity, somebody mentioned accuracy. I think that's included in the concept of integrity, but I think integrity is a little bit bigger. So this is a really good example of a chart that was sent through social media. It was a Reuters graphic about gun deaths in Florida. And in 2005, Florida enacted a new law called Stand Your Ground, and it basically allowed anybody to walk down the street and almost be a vigilante and kind of challenge people on the street using a firearm. Now, in 2005, according to this graphic, what do you think happened? Did deaths by guns go up or down? Anybody? Did deaths go up or down after 2005? Nelson says they went down, because visually, that's what it looks like, isn't it? I would argue that the chart is probably better presented like this. Exactly, Rob has it correct. They went up, but at a glance, they fell. So what you see, if you look very closely at the scale there, is that it starts from 0 down to 200, 400, 600, or down to. I suppose it's actually up to, isn't it? And so I think that you have to pay a lot of attention about your use of data and how it works, or where it's going to be. So in a social media graphic, because it's floating past in an instant, it's not effective at all to have this, because it makes it look immediately at first glance that it went down. That's not being integral to the data. I suppose in the data visualization expert's defense, she suggested that she was inspired by a New York Times graphic of deaths in Iraq and showing deaths or casualties as basically a loss or a negative number. And I can kind of see that one. The New York Times graphic, if you Google, I think it's civilian deaths in Iraq, New York Times, you can see has a lot more, it looks like dripping blood basically. So it kind of, there was a lot more visual context to it that made it work in a way that this one doesn't particularly. So it's important to really show what the data says. And I think we had a question in here as we're going along about how do you address people suggesting you're trying to manipulate the data by presenting it in a certain way. So we're going to go through kind of design best practice next week. And with the idea of if you follow those design best practices, you will maybe not be accused of manipulating the data. Of course, you can absolutely use those design best practices and that knowledge to your advantage and really work to manipulate the data. So, you know, a lot of it is about how you, the authority to which you present yourself overall, I suppose. It's not just about, you know, it's about building a reputation potentially for solid research, for example. But it's also about adhering to those design principles overall. The last thing, just in the interest of time, I want to keep moving on, is interestingness. Now, this is a trap that I think a lot of people very easily fall into, and I apologize that a lot of these are all American focused, but there we are. This is a map, we have a geographic map here of the US saying, our site's users, subscribers to Martha Stewart Living. Martha Stewart is a home expert basically, and we have consumers of boiled eggs, and it's like, oh yes, the business implications are clear. No, of course it's not clear. What is that actually showing? It's just showing where the population lives in the United States. So that in and of itself is not an interesting thing. Just because we can visualize something doesn't mean that we should. We need to think a lot about what we are visualizing, and that's a reason that, for example, we tend to do a lot with, oh, this is going to get jargony, I'm afraid, population normalization. So showing our site's users per capita, for example, might start throwing up something interesting. Just showing the population, definitely not. So those are the 4 qualities of effective data visualization according to David McCandless. But I think it's also to think a little bit more about how do we tell stories with the data. Again, I've said it before, it's important to think about 3 things: objectives, audience, and the messaging. So if you're trying to do something that is declarative, trying to tell a story, you definitely need to focus relentlessly on telling that story, getting a clear message, and editing and editing and editing. I suppose this is a bit of a strange example, or might not seem as relevant, but the great Coco Chanel always said that before you go outside, take a look at yourself in the mirror and remove one accessory, right? It's about editing and making sure that there's this relentless focus on the message. And a data visualization is, I suppose, just like fashion in that sense. You've got to be very careful and edit and tell that message. In terms of the objectives of interactive ones, you need to be thinking about, where do I want to potentially lead the audience? How do I get them there? What sort of a user experience do I set up in order to get them to that point? In terms of different audiences, especially think tanks might have a few different ones. This is from a great website called Communicating Data that was produced at the University of Washington. They run a really big project looking at the global burden of disease, and basically this entire website on communicating data is the background to how they think about how they design their data visualizations. So I do recommend that you check it out. They say that they have 4 different audiences that they work with. So the casual users, those people who are more perhaps informed public, who are interested in the global burden of disease, or what the rate of diabetes, for example, is in the US as compared to South Africa. They might be interested in really high-level information. Whereas you have some data actors who are like policymakers or politicians, parliamentarians, that sort of Congress people, that sort of approach, where they might need a little bit of information, or they might need you to tell more of a story than the casual user who just wants really basic information, but they don't need quite as deep a level of information. Analysts, like civil servants, might need to be able to actually access the raw data behind it, or maybe they need time series data as opposed to just a specific point of time. And researchers even more so. So how do we design and develop, whether it's a research report or a visualization that caters for these different audiences? It's important to be thinking about that. This, if you've ever seen a presentation from me, is also incredibly important in terms of thinking through messages. Chip and Dan Heath wrote a great book called Made to Stick, and they talked about how do you create successful messages. You need to tell a story. Ideally, it should have something that is unexpected. It does need to be credible. It needs to be concrete. And that's one thing that data visualizations are really, really effective at, again, because they can put things into a particular scale. So you can say that's more than the defense budget, the health budget is, or that's the equivalent of 10 football pitches, and you can visualize it. Emotional is maybe to use with care, and they need to be simple. So thinking through the messages and making them successful is important. And I guess what I would leave you with in this little section is thinking about taking advantage of a visualization's ability to layer information, provide some relevant context and background, highlight key elements, key messages, and potentially, as you're going through a report, for example, or if you have an infographic combining lots of different visualizations, to use different types to tell different aspects of the story. When it comes to looking at data specifically, and this is maybe in the discovery stage, and you're trying to pick out a story in there somewhere, just a few things and tips to look out for. One of them is trends. Sudden departures from trend might be a good thing to say, what's going on here? This outlier is, there's going to be a story there. If there are particular patterns, for example, so if on a monthly basis or a weekly basis or an annual basis, things tend to repeat themselves. Look out for those sort of things when you're trying to pick a story from the different data. Right. I think that is potentially an okay breaking point for the time being. Are there particular questions on any of that before we go along? I also realize that we're starting to hit up against the time. Then maybe this is a good time to, I'm going to jump through this, and we are going to do that maybe next week. But I will say, I'll leave you with 7 deadly sins of data visualization, and then I'll talk a little bit about the assignments. So these are effectively top tips, or the things that you shouldn't do. Not telling a story is one of the big sins. We've already talked about how you find a little bit about how you might find a story with your data. Misrepresentation, definitely try not to do that. And next week, I promise we're going to be showing exactly how you can represent and misrepresent your data. Shifting scales without mentioning it is very problematic, so don't do it. Relying too heavily on text can be a big problem. On the other hand, ambiguity can also be a problem. So sometimes if you abbreviate things too much, then you're not going to actually know what you're visualizing, for example. So too much text is a problem, but being too little text can also be a problem. So you have to find that right balance. Overcomplicating things is one of the big ones. And not having a point to the visualization can also be really important. So Caitlin says we have until 12:30. The idea was that these were supposed to be up to 90 minutes if we needed, but ideally closer to the 75-minute point. But we do have time. I wanted to have a little bit of time for questions, or if we find that we want to go back to that other section, I'm happy to go back to it. So a little bit up to you guys. Are there particular questions? Stunned silence. Are all the links available in the forum? Definitely, I will put together after this, as we get there's been a recording of this, which we will make available. We will make the presentation itself available in PDF format, and I will pull out some of the key links and additional reading that I highly recommend you take a look at. Absolutely. Were there any in particular that you were looking for, beyond me just saying, hey, Google that? Nope. Let me walk through the assignment and then we'll leave on a bit of a game, which is more fun anyway. Yeah. No worries, Jennifer. So you've got some at the start, but all of the resources as well. One of the things I will, I suppose it's tooting my own horn because I helped put this website together, but it is very helpful. The On Think Tank's data visualization competition, it's not just a competition website. There's a huge resources section that mentions a lot of these links and blogs and discussion forums and that sort of thing directly. So I do recommend checking that out. That is at ttdataviz with an S, the British way, .onthinktanks.org. And I will put that in the forum as well. But I will absolutely make sure that I send a lot of these resources. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to really quickly go through the assignment and the schedule for that over the next few weeks. And then I think we can end it on playing, it's not really playing a game, but having a little bit more fun to lighten the mood as we leave this one. But the idea is for those of you who are taking the full course, who would like to get a certificate, that we do basically need to complete one exercise. This course is a little bit special and different from some of the other ones in that you have actually 4 options of one to send in. So one of the things that we're going to be doing next week is tidying a data set to use in a data visualization. And so I will send through next week a sample data set that you could work to tidy. That could be one exercise. Or we will have a particular chart that, based on some of the principles we've talked about today and that we will talk about next week, you need to refine and improve using either Excel or Google Sheets. And then the following week, we're going to be doing and creating an interactive dashboard with Tableau. So your job would be, you could potentially do an exercise, which is to create an interactive dashboard of your own, well, based on some sample data that we have. Or forget all of that, based on your own data that you might have, but using the techniques and approaches that we will be discussing over the next couple of weeks, create your own visualization. And so obviously this week we've had our first webinar. Next week and the following week, the webinars are on Thursdays. So it's the 15th and the 22nd of June. It will focus on improving your Excel charts, making your Excel charts great again, I suppose. Then that's when we will go through the first 2 exercises. On the third webinar, we'll be looking at Tableau Public, and we will be going through the third exercise. And then basically following those, you have 1 week until the 29th of June to turn in any one of those 4 exercises, and I will send feedback by the following week. So that's just so you're aware of what is upcoming and what is required to complete the course and get a certificate. We've tried to make this, like I said, less painful than what we did last year. We only had the option of creating a visualization, and I think that actually you will find that it's going to be easier having these very tangible exercises that you can choose from. Having said that only one is due, you're more than welcome to do all of the exercises. It's just that only one is required to pass, and feedback will be provided on one per person, basically. Any quick questions on that? And then we'll go to the last section. Okay, hopefully that's relatively straightforward, and for the next couple of weeks we'll take a look at all of them, or the exercises in closer detail, but it's just to give you a heads up that it's happening. One of the things I like to look at, and today we're doing kind of the what doesn't work or what doesn't make an effective data visualization. And there's a great blog that I will also share a link to called WTF Viz, which basically asks what the heck is wrong with these data visualizations. So here are a few examples, and I'd be curious if you, I'd be curious for you to let me know what's wrong with the visualizations. I see we have a question really quickly on the exercises. Yes, you can choose which exercise I give feedback on. The question was, even if we work on all 4 exercises, can you choose which one I give you feedback on? And that is absolutely possible, yes. So, just as a primer for next week, because we're going to be talking about design best practice and all sorts of things, what do we think is wrong with this data visualization? Numbers don't add up. Too many sections. Color scheme. Nobody said everything yet. No clear story. Some is more than 100%. 3 titles. Yeah, I suppose there are 3 titles going on as well. Purpose not clear. Order of categories is not clear. Oh my goodness, we've got all sorts of different ones. Very crowded as well. I would say that there's a lot of issues with this particular chart, but one of the most egregious is that they've used a pie chart for data that is not in a relationship that is part to whole. The numbers don't add up to 100%, right? So that's an incredibly important one, and things that we can get right relatively easily by choosing the right chart type, for example. What about this one? 90% of nurses earn less than $126,000. What's wrong with this one? That's not 90%. Well done. Well spotted. I'm not really quite sure why they've used that particular, that's what we call a donut chart. It's not 90%. What else is wrong with it? Anything? Big O. 90% of nurses, perhaps? Yeah, I suppose we could consider that a typo. One of the things that's a good sort of best practice, yeah, not clear why this is a problem at all. There's also that. I suppose you would also have the starting salary in the UK is much closer to $20,000, but who knows? Anyway, the color isn't there, the context is missing. To be fair, I will say, to be fair to the WTF Viz blog, they have maybe this is part of a fuller infographic that adds more context, and we've just cut out a specific thing. So absolutely you're right in that one, but there's also potentially that sort of issue. Just as then a best practice one, as a general rule of thumb, if you're using a donut chart or a pie chart, your biggest slice normally should start at the 12 o'clock position. So this one is tilted, I assume, for design I don't know what for purposes are. I'm not going to try and second guess the designer, but generally speaking, try and start at 90 degrees, or sorry, at 12 o'clock. And normally it goes clockwise, although anti-clockwise it can also be acceptable. What about this one? Doesn't add up again. Yep, that's a really basic thing. 28% plus 40% does not make 100%. And it's not a part to whole relationship. You're actually comparing 2 different things. Too much text? I would say that's probably a big one. We basically have no idea what this chart is about until you read through that. That's not kind of just what is it about? So yes, there's too much text. 3D is a very difficult, and that is something that we basically say is a big no-no. 3D is something where it really skews the perspective, and I'll show you a better example of that next week, and means that you actually can't really tell, not that this is 40% or 28% to begin with, but where, for example, in particular right here, if you're looking at it not very closely, if you're glancing at it, this 3D shaded bit can be visually interpreted as part of that area, which is already confusing enough. What is it? I don't know if what is it about is what the heck is wrong with it, or what is it about? I have no idea what this is about, but there we go. Apparently a huge number of ongoing projects in Bangalore. So go figure. I literally don't know what this is about. It's clearly about, I have no, I don't, I wish I could tell you what it's about. I don't know. What's wrong with this one? Okay, so we have a particular issue of jargon about putative promoter CNCS, which I'm sure we all know what that is. The comparables are done in the same color, which potentially is a good thing, right? Maybe that's helping organize the information because they have native, reverse. So the native and reverse of each thing is the same color. Okay, well, we don't have a very clear title on this one, but I might have cut that off, so I'm not going to give them a problem with that. To me, the most egregious one, yes, Rob, is that the broken bars don't match the axis. I don't know if you see here, but 125 is 135 is the same as 172 is the same as, what is that? Oh, 1,100. That's completely different, and yet it's visualized as exactly the same. Okay, they said that it's a break, but that's failed, and therefore you would maybe need to think of a different way of actually visualizing that information. Okay, last but not least, this is one of my favorite ones. What's wrong with this one? Okay, we're starting to get there. No n given, so we don't know how big the sample size is. Okay, that's a very basic issue. More of an issue from Jennifer is that that's not where Switzerland is it? No, that's the middle of France somewhere. I'm not sure exactly where that, Languedoc-Roussillon or something. I don't know where that is, but that's not where Switzerland is. The United Kingdom is in Wales, but at least that's part of the United Kingdom, so sure, why not? Anything else? Poor for comparison. Thank you, Jennifer. Yes, the dots are just randomly sprawled across Europe, and the colors don't make any sense. They don't have any meaning. The size of the dots don't have any meaning. In the Netherlands, it is 75% yes and ostensibly a green, although that looks more like Denmark to me. The United Kingdom is 63% yes, but is this red color. What is going on with this map? This screams to me somebody who just said, I don't know, find me a map and put something on top of it. I don't really know what that means. I suppose we're also going to talk a little bit more about usage of colors next week, but in principle, red and green isn't a very good combination if you're wanting to make it accessible and friendly for the colorblind. So that can be difficult to tell the difference between those. So there are a few things, and I think this goes back to the point of with data visualizations, what we're going to be learning can be very powerful, and when done right, data visualizations are very powerful. But just because you can do something definitely doesn't mean that you should do it. And being accurate is, or having integrity with the data is incredibly important. I think that's a fair enough note to leave on for this afternoon. I guess I will open it up one last time to any particular questions, and then if there aren't any, I will bid you a fond farewell, unless Leandro wants to jump in with any other concluding practicalities. Excellent. Jennifer, thanks. And Caitlin, thank you both. Glad that you have enjoyed this bit so far. Like I said, we will have this part, or this particular webinar, is more on the theoretical side of things. Next week, it starts getting very applied. Leandro, I think, texted this to everybody. I'm not sure if that was what we meant, but we will be sure, as soon as we hang up, Leandro will start working on processing the recording, and we will make that available along with the PowerPoint itself via the forum. Excellent. Well, I hope that you guys all have a great afternoon. And again, a special reminder that the next week's webinar is not on Monday, but is rather on a Thursday. We had to change it this week for a number of conflicting reasons, including that Theresa May decided to call an election here in the UK. So apologies for that, but for the next two, they will be taking place on Thursday at the same time. What was it, 3 p.m. GMT, which is 4 p.m. here in the UK, 5 p.m. in Central Europe, and hopefully you guys can figure it out from there. But thank you all so much, and look forward to continuing the conversation. Have a good afternoon.